European leaders for an emergency meeting. Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, has told people and reporters that the US president is listening to the EU.
They're stakeholders here. It's important to them, and it's important to him how they feel, so he's listening intently. But first and foremost, we had to get to the Ukrainians, get them back, right? Get them back in a different place, and they're talking peace now.
The Justice Secretary says she'll review the powers of the Sentencing Council and change the law if necessary after disagreeing with its recommended new guidelines. Judges in England and Wales are being asked to consider a criminal's ethnicity, race and gender before punishment is issued. There's been criticism it would create a two-tiered justice system. But Mark Day, Deputy Director at the Prison Reform Trust, disagrees.
The idea that this is two-tier justice is slightly misleading because this is simply about requiring additional information in order to inform a sentencing decision.
The US President Donald Trump said he's lifting tariffs on most goods from Mexico for 4 weeks over economic fears from a trade war. Levies were imposed on imports from there and Canada at the beginning of the week, but have been lifted on Mexico out of respect for Mexico's leader. And children under the age of 16 could be banned from using social media as part of plans to keep young people safer online. The government is expected to look into it over the next year. The current limit is 13. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 73 points at 86.83. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.19. LBC weather, cloud moving in from the west tonight, bringing scattered showers to some parts and a low of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
3 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to the programme if you've just joined us. And if you have, I imagine it's because you want to speak to Simon Marks, our US correspondent, who is joining us for this hour live from Washington, D.C. If you do indeed wish to ask him a question, 0345 6060 973. Now, I thought having Simon on today would be a good rehearsal, really, for his My American Week slot with Tom Swarbrick tomorrow, because he probably need. I mean, after the week you've had, Simon, I imagine you need to have a bit of a rehearsal.
Do you know what? For the last, I think, 4 weeks, you know, the slot is supposed to come in around the 10-minute mark. Yeah. And every week I end up in the first iteration, it's running around 13 or 14 minutes. And I just have to hack stuff back and stuff ends up on the cutting room floor, which is, sometimes a shame. But on the other hand, it's a very, very good process to go through in terms of brevity, the brevity of writing and the inclusivity of as much material as you possibly can get into a 10-minute piece. But I mean, it is astonishing the velocity with which events have been taking place here ever since January the 20th, when Donald Trump took the oath of office. And it's hard to imagine that it hasn't yet been a full week since that blazing row between Donald Trump, J.D. Vance and Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office. In fact, that was taking place. We were just learning about that taking place last Friday when American Week was about to air. And instead we had to preempt the edition of the slot that we created, and we did live coverage of what was taking place in the Oval Office. So who knows whether there will actually be one tomorrow or not, but I'm certainly counting on it.
Franz says, I have a question. Is it still President Trump, or should we call him Comrade Trump?
Well, I think that question is rooted in the reality of an American president that is taking unprecedented steps to warm up the relationship with Moscow that up until now has been absolutely frozen for the best part of a decade, a relationship that started really taking a nosedive after the Russian annexation of Crimea. I mean, Barack Obama went nowhere particularly far in terms of taking concrete steps to try and protect Crimea, but he certainly certainly started imposing the sanctions and diplomatic freezes on the bilateral relationship with Moscow that have hampered those relations ever since. Now, before securing a single promise from the Russians, before securing any kind of concessions ahead of peace negotiations with the Russians, Donald Trump has already given Vladimir Putin so much of what he wants: an acknowledgement that Ukraine will not be allowed to become a member of NATO, an agreement that Ukraine is going to have to cede some territory to Russia in any peace negotiation, the possibility even of Russia being returned to a seat at the table around the G7 as the result of any kind of peace negotiation, and even smaller stuff that hasn't been attracting anywhere near enough international attention. But if you look at the announcement this week by the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, is basically pausing all efforts to combat Russian cybercrime and cyber attacks on the United States, that is an incredible win for the Kremlin. And why on earth would you be doing that before the Russians and the Ukrainians have held a single face-to-face conversation?
And also the news today that Trump administration officials, maybe it hasn't been endorsed, I don't know, have been meeting with people who are opposed to Zelensky in Ukraine, with presumably the plan to replace Zelensky.
Yeah, no, and those meetings absolutely have been taking place. I was talking earlier today to a former senior administration official, a Republican, an ardent supporter of Ukraine, absolutely horrified by those reports that top Trump insiders have essentially been trying to goad Zelensky's principal competitors in Ukraine to embrace this entirely false demand that Donald Trump is making for fresh elections in Ukraine. Entirely false, of course, because like Winston Churchill, Volodymyr Zelensky has argued that Ukraine is in no position to hold an election while the country is being bombarded daily by Russia. But both the two main opposition leaders, Yulia Tymoshenko and Petro Poroshenko, have said, I think within the last few hours, that they agree with Zelensky, that there is no case for those fresh elections to be held today. But, you know, all of these actions that the Trump administration is taking are absolutely ripped from the Vladimir Putin playbook. Now, whether we should be referring to him as Comrade Trump, that's in the eye of the beholder. But there's no question that he is taking this country down that road.
And if you want to put yourself in as a mediator in an international dispute or even a war, traditionally, you would treat both sides equally. So if you're talking to the opposition leaders in Ukraine, why not the opposition leaders in Moscow? Well, we all know why that is, don't we?
Yeah, but you see, that's the really interesting question, because after that mugging of Zelensky, and I don't think you can call it anything else, it was a premeditated mugging of Ukraine's leader by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance 6 days ago. You had various Republicans, including Lindsey Graham, coming out, senator from South Carolina, a Trump whisperer, and saying that Zelensky had blotted his copybook, he'd been so disrespectful to Donald Trump, it was going to be very, very difficult for the Americans to view Volodymyr Zelensky as any kind of honest broker going forwards. But what nobody here in this press corps asked was, but why on earth should Volodymyr Zelensky view Donald Trump as an honest broker going forwards? Because it seems pretty apparent that he is so now aligned with Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Putin's desires in Ukraine that it's very hard to imagine that the United States in any way can be seen as an honest broker. You could say the same of the European Union because they're so aligned with Volodymyr Zelensky. So these battle lines are now completely drawn. And of course, the big question overhanging all of this is, what on earth is the UK going to do? What on earth is Europe going to do if it indeed becomes apparent that what Donald Trump really covets is an alliance with Vladimir Putin in Moscow?
Lots of texts, lots of WhatsApp messages, lots of calls, but we could do with more. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask Simon a question. John says, please, Iain, it's the lovely Simon Marks, brackets like Debbie McGee. There's no accounting for taste, is there? David is in Bayswater. Hello, David.
Hello, yeah. Hi, Simon. So I wanted to ask, assuming we all put human lives at the top of the agenda, will we have to reassess President Trump if he achieves peace in the Ukraine as a man and a politician?
Well, Donald Trump certainly hopes that you're going to reassess Donald Trump if he achieves peace, not only in Ukraine, but also in Gaza. I mean, I think there is no doubt. I think we all know that Donald Trump would love to be considered a contender for the Nobel Peace Prize. And indeed, he said several times within the last couple of weeks, they'll never give me the Nobel Peace Prize. I could even, bring peace to all of these conflicts and I would be overlooked. And I think that you make an important point, David. We would not be having any of these conversations. We were not having any of these conversations about peace negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians before Donald Trump came into power. There's no question that on that conflict, and arguably also the situation in the Middle East, he has made a very significant difference by doing some things that Joe Biden absolutely failed to do. And you can make the same case, by the way, for some of the things that he's done domestically here in the United States. Now, that's not to say that I necessarily think that he's going about all of this in the right way, but there is no question that what Donald Trump would argue is common sense policies, simply saying to the Ukrainians and to the Russians, this just can't continue. This is a ridiculous war. There absolutely has to be some kind of solution to it that is brokered. That in and of itself has made a difference. How much further he would have got had he portrayed himself as an honest broker, rather than parroting Vladimir Putin's lines, agreeing to outcomes that are now going to make it much harder for the Ukrainians to sign on to the kind of peace agreement that Donald Trump envisages, extorting Ukraine through this minerals deal that is going to leave the United States controlling substantial portions of its minerals for generations to come. If he hadn't done all of that, he might have got further. But if he is the American president who oversees a process that brings peace to Ukraine and also brings peace to Gaza and potentially to other regions as well, there will be large cohorts of his supporters here saying he ought to get the Nobel Peace Prize.
I suppose it depends what you mean by peace, doesn't it, Simon? Because in a lot of the tweets that I see on this, where people say, he just wants peace, you could actually insert the word capitulation or surrender rather than peace, because that, in effect, is what it will be.
Yeah, but you could also insert the word money, because in both instances he just wants money. I mean, if you've seen that Trump Gaza film that he put out, that AI-generated vision of Gaza, when he's had a chance to plant the stars and stripes there and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East, it's absolutely apparent that he covets for himself that beachfront real estate. In Ukraine, he covets for the country the rare earth minerals, and quite possibly he covets for some of his friends the opportunity to go into Ukraine and make money out of exploiting those rare earth minerals. And the capitulation of Ukraine is part and parcel of his approach to all of this, because he simply wants to clear the conflict away. He's not interested, as far as we can tell, at all, really, in any notion that there should be a just peace. He certainly doesn't buy the Prime Minister's argument that this is all still nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. That's long gone as a principle of American policy in the region. And wherever possible, as we've seen relentlessly since January the 20th, he and his wealthy backers here, Elon Musk and all the others, want to engage in state capture in the United States, so that they not only aggrandize themselves in terms of positions of power, but they also aggrandize their own positions of wealth. Now, that does not, to go back to David's question, preclude the possibility of him creating peace, but the nature of the peace, as the Prime Minister suggested when he was here a few days ago, you've got to acknowledge that Russia was the aggressor and should not be rewarded for its actions. That doesn't compute in Trump's world.
No, indeed not. Right, we'll take more of your calls to Simon Marks in just a few moments. We have some news from President Zelensky. He's just posted on Twitter. Next Monday, I have a visit planned to Saudi Arabia for a meeting with the Crown Prince. After that, my team will stay in Saudi Arabia to work with our American partners. Ukraine is most interested in peace. As we told the President of the United States, Ukraine is working and will continue to work constructively for a swift and reliable peace. It's 8:15.
This is LBC.
Hello, business owners.
On LBC. Text 84850.
17 minutes past 8. You can watch us on Global Player. Simon Marks is with us taking your calls. The BBC reporting that Donald Trump has now paused some of the Canadian and Mexican tariffs that he imposed a couple of days ago until next month. He's making it up as he goes along, isn't he, Simon?
He is making it up as he goes along, certainly as far as tariffs are concerned, and the moves that he's made over the last couple of hours here, Iain, has done nothing to soothe the markets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average right now is down another 466 points. That's another 1% in the index's value. We've seen similar falls on the Nasdaq and the S&P. And so if this move by Donald Trump, with a partial climb down announced yesterday and now a fuller climb down announced today, was designed to stop the rout on Wall Street, it does not currently appear to have worked. There's about another 45 minutes left in the trading day in New York, so we'll keep an eye and see if that situation turns itself around. But there are growing concerns about the president's insistence that the United States not only can weather a trade war with Canada, Mexico and China, but thrive as the result of that trade war. I mean, he keeps being told by Nobel Prize winning economists that he is simply wrong if he thinks that the costs of a trade war are not going to be passed on to consumers here in the United States. And there was demonstrable evidence of it this week, because the minute Canada increased the price of its crude to overcome the 25% tariffs that were being imposed on Tuesday at petrol stations in various parts of the country here, prices per gallon started ticking up 20 cents a gallon, 30 cents a gallon, 40 cents a gallon higher. And so people could immediately see the impact this was having. Even the Fox Business Channel spent a day broadcasting live from a Ford truck dealership in Detroit, close to the the Canadian border. And you could see the prices of pickup trucks going up as the dealership took into account the fact that new stocks were going to be priced at a higher level. So, you know, how long he carries on announcing tariffs and then doing what he's done today, which is sort of kick them into the long grass, we'll come back to it again in a month's time. I think it's weighing on investors, it's weighing on the public, and his argument that, you know, we're simply correcting a situation where other countries have been ripping us off for decades is not currently an argument that I think is entirely entirely resonating with the American public that's worried about rising prices, whether it's the cost of petrol at the pumps or food in the supermarkets or, steel that they may be needing for building and construction projects.
Right, let's go to James in Barnes. James, hi.
Hi. This is more or less what I wanted to ask Simon, is that when you think that this was one of the strands that won him the election, apart from the Haitian immigrants coming across and eating the cats and the dogs, that it was to make America's economy grow, bring down inflation, prices would come down. And any economist would have told him, it's a bit like the American version of Brexit, that if you try and destroy your biggest market that you trade with, there's only one answer as to what's going to happen. And so my question to Simon is...
just before you go on with that, James, of course, UK exports to the EU are higher now than they were at Brexit.
They may be higher, but the Brexit effect on our economy is being suffered enormously, isn't it, Ian?
Well,
and that's my point.
So you say. Anyway, carry on with your question.
Okay, well, I've never heard of the exports being... I trust you're right, Ian. I haven't checked in the last few weeks whether the exports to France and Germany are higher than they were before we Brexited. And I know you were a Brexiter, so I'm not... I don't have any argument with people that voted for it. But it seems to me that the American population were conned, similar to how Boris Johnson did it, into thinking that we're all going to be better off by voting for this man, when in fact we're now worse off. So my question to Simon is, does he think, bear in mind that Trump has got so much backing from all the billionaires, from Amazon to we go on and on and on, whose market share has dropped enormously, et cetera, that eventually he will actually have to somehow pull back from this and give clarity to the markets, and forget kicking it down, a month down the road. He will have to come out of it completely, because otherwise I don't see where this ends.
Simon?
Yeah, I think that's a really important and trenchant question, James. I think that the difficulty with all of this, as Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, expressed this week, is that Donald Trump is building arguments that are based on sand. He's making policy that is based on disinformation. And he's not only doing it with regard to tariffs, you can also argue that he's doing exactly the same with regard to the crisis in Ukraine, saying things like the Ukrainians started it. As far as this trade war is concerned, he is absolutely convinced that if you impose these tariffs, the result will be, one, the United States collects millions and millions and millions of dollars in tariffs that it's not currently collecting, that can be then used to help the United States economy. By the way, the mechanism for how the United States is actually going to collect those tariffs is also coming under strain, because it doesn't exist in sufficient... it's insufficiently developed and large to collect the kind of tariffs at the borders that suddenly customs are being required to assess. But he believes that you're going to be awash with cash that he can then use to offset some of the negative impacts, which will be inflationary. He denies those negative impacts are going to occur. In his mind, you can amass all of this money through tariffs, use it to balance the budget. He's even suggested that perhaps one day there'll be so much money sloshing around from tariffs and from Elon Musk's war on waste and fraud in public expenditure that it might even be possible to abandon income tax, the federal income tax here, as the key source of government funding. Now, there just aren't very many economists out there that buy any of that. And yet this entire policy has been constructed on that false narrative. And so what I think Justin Trudeau was, really confounded by as he sought to push back against this was, and he quoted the Wall Street Journal, which has said, this is a dumb policy. It's a policy that's not rooted in reality. Now, the markets have provided the corrective over the last 48 hours, but Trump is not ready to fold his tent. He's not throwing his hand in. He's simply saying, I'll come back to it again in a month's time. At the end of the day, it's all going to come down to one very simple question. When I go into a supermarket, am I going to be able to afford a dozen eggs and the other goods, the prices of which are still continuing to rise? And for how long can President Trump point the finger of blame for those price rises on Joe Biden? With every passing day, there's more of a limit on his ability to persuade the public that it was all Joe Biden's fault. Eventually, he's going to own this situation. He just doesn't quite own it yet.
James, great question. Thank you. John is in Reading. John, what would you like to ask Simon?
Evening, gentlemen. Sorry, I got a cold. My question...
Me too, John.
My question for you guys is, do you see, given the state of the economy in America, a form of Labour landslide for the Democrats or another party, given the state of the economy? And I would also add, do you see any form of leadership from the Democratic Party? Because it seems they're completely rudderless. And then also, I would add, this is me personally, do the Americans realise how pissed off the British are about the insult towards our military and our military dead? Is there any form of realisation from the Americans?
Yeah, I can deal with that last bit first. I mean, the answer to that question is no. I mean, there has been precious little realistic coverage here for American audiences of just how agonized Europe is generally over what's been taking place since J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, and obviously since the drubbing of Zelensky, and very little coverage here of those comments by J.D. Vance that inflamed people in the UK. I think there's an information vacuum that is developing between Americans and Europeans and people in the UK about exactly what is going on here. The answer to your question about is there any prospect of a Democratic Party landslide is directly related to the other question you asked, which is when are the Democrats going to find someone who can lead them out of the wilderness? Because they are absolutely, totally in the wilderness. And what we witnessed this, on the state of the joint session, to the speech to the joint session of Congress that President Trump made earlier in the week was absolutely astonishing. Some Democrats, a handful of them, chose to stay away, including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, who kind of live reacted to the speech, saying she wouldn't, grace it with her presence. Others chose to protest, including Congressman Al Green, who, of course, was ordered out of the chamber. And the rest of them sat there looking glum, carrying these kind of ping pong bats that said Musk lies and, other completely pointless assertions. I mean, either you think this guy is an illegitimate president and is disgracing the country and is destroying American democracy, or you don't. And if you do think that, what were you doing sitting there listening to the speech and essentially providing him with the imprimatur of respectability? They have completely collapsed as a political force, the Democrats, in the minds of the American public since January the 20th. And the danger here is that by the time the next set of elections happens here, we're going to have midterm elections in 2 years' time in November of 2026, and then another presidential election in November of 2028. It is very difficult to sit here today, just 6 weeks into this Trump administration, and say that those election cycles are necessarily going to be run along traditional democratic lines. So if the Democrats want to save American democracy, they need to start fighting for it, because pretty soon they may find it's too late.
Great question, John. Thank you very much. And apologies if anyone was offended by the naughty word that John used there. It's not 9 o'clock yet. Right, we will come back to more of your calls in just a few minutes' time. 0345 6060 973. Simon Mark's with us till 9. And then we're going to talk about smacking, but the two things are unrelated. Or maybe not. Did you ever smack your children, Simon?
No, never once. No. And look at them today.
Well, quite. And I know them both, and they're fine young men. 8:30 is the time on LBC. Let's go to the news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
A man who'd already admitted murdering his ex-partner and two of her relatives has now been found guilty of raping her. 26-year-old Kyle Clifford killed Louise Hunt, her sister and her mother in Bushey in Hertfordshire in July. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed talks will take place in Saudi Arabia next week with the US. It's to work towards a peace deal after Russia invaded Ukraine. And the US President Donald Trump's lifting tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada for a month under a North American trade pact. Levies were imposed on imports from both countries at the beginning of the week. LBC weather, cloud moving in from the west tonight, bringing scattered showers to some parts and a low of 7 degrees.
LBC.
When you
On LBC.
8:33, Julius says, naughty Iain, you got me checking UK export statistics, and your figure about UK to EU exports is clearly entirely selective, especially as our exports there fell compared to where they were expected to be had we not Brexited. Well, I'm very glad you don't dispute the fact that they have gone up, Julius. He goes, and exports to non-EU countries double those of EU exports. Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? I'm no professional statistician, clearly not, but even I can spot a journalist behaving inappropriately. Stay well, Julius, he, him, 60, Weybridge. Thank you very much. Simon, you have news.
I do have news. I can tell you why the markets keep sliding, because Donald Trump, while we've been on the air, Iain, is in the Oval Office signing executive orders, as he does every single day, because that's the way he chooses to govern. And he is talking. He is saying that on tariffs, and this is a quote, the big one will happen in April. So he's not only kicking the can down the road, he's doubling down on the can. And that resulted in some of the big automaker shares suddenly sliding. He has also hit out again at other members of NATO, saying that NATO countries are still not paying enough. If NATO countries won't pay, the US won't defend them. He says that he is not sure whether America's NATO allies would defend the United States if they were called on to do so. He has insisted that he is not keeping an eye on the financial markets. Well, that would would certainly explain precisely why the financial markets are having such a rough ride today. He says that he's going to be heading to Saudi Arabia himself, he thinks, over the next month and a half, because they have agreed to a large new investment in the United States, but I don't yet see any details of what that investment has, what the details are of that investment. And he says that he and the Russians and the Ukrainians have made progress in the last few days. Ukraine wants a deal, he says. I suspect we'll all get to see and hear the tape of that within the next half an hour or so, once these executive orders are all signed and that event with the press ends in the Oval Office. But, you know, more fresh shade being thrown in the direction of the UK, the French and the United States, other NATO allies, about the nature of that defensive alliance, which will raise fresh questions at number 10 about the US president's commitment to the transatlantic relationship.
Happy days. Now, is it today that he's abolishing the Department of Education?
Well, it could be at any day. I don't know if he's signing. I'm not sure which orders he's signing today.
I thought I read that he was. He is doing it today.
Yeah, then it is today, because he's now got Linda McMahon in as Education Secretary, the former, I think she was involved in the worldwide wrestling, right? I think that's her claim to fame. So she's now, she was
actually doing it.
Married to Vince McMahon. Well, on occasion doing it, not. I mean, only on rare occasions where she'd engage in a brawl with other family members as part of the whole shtick there. But she has been told by Trump she is going to be the last Secretary of Education, and she has told staff at the Department of Education that they are now embarking on what she has called their final mission. So they are very, very serious about shutting the department down entirely. And what they mean by that is putting all the power for education in the hands of America's individual 50 states. Now, those 50 states already have a considerable amount of power to regulate education in their jurisdictions, but this is about the wholesale shutdown of the Department of Education in this, you know, entirely false claim that it's going to save the country vast amounts of wasted, fraudulent public expenditure.
Ollie says, while you're talking about Trump, are you going to cover his plans to close down embassies and reduce US influence around the world, currently being reported in the New York Times? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, they are talking about downsizing a large number of foreign missions around the country, and instead of having individual embassies in individual countries, where they think it is prudent, and I'm sure there will be some areas of the world, particularly where China is engaged in expansionist activity, they will not deem it prudent, but they might have, you know, one kind of anchor embassy to represent a whole variety of different neighbouring countries. I mean, that has been a hallmark of smaller nations traditionally, where smaller nations that don't have the kind of resources that the United States can marshal will open a smaller number of embassies and consulates around the world that will have multiple responsibilities for multiple jurisdictions. But to see the United States do that and to walk away from soft power, cultural exchanges, suggestions by some in Trump's inner circle that he ought to be completely abolishing Voice of America and the international broadcasting divisions that the United States government operates, is a real shift in the traditional notion that America leads by example, and that the example is not simply based on a demonstration of power dynamics, but that soft power and diplomacy can really assist in explaining America's morals, its values and its position to international audiences. And that diplomatic move is all part and parcel of that.
Mike's in Beverley. Hello, Mike.
Yeah. A couple of questions, if I can, Simon. An easy one and then a more difficult one. The easy one is Trump has recently said to Hamas that they have to give back all the hostages or else. But I can't recall when Trump told Putin to give the 20,000 Ukrainian children back. Perhaps you can remember when he said that. And the second question is, how much influence do you think Peter Thiel has on the Trump-Vance arrangement?
Those are both great questions, Mike. On the first question, of course, Donald Trump has never made that demand publicly of Vladimir Putin. And I will say that it has been astonishing the extent to which some Trump officials have been caught unawares when they've been asked by reporters over the last few weeks about whether the future of those children taken from Ukraine against the will of their parents back to Russia, now living with foster parents in Russia, are going to be part of the negotiations. And I think it was Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, who was particularly on one television program here recently, seemingly flummoxed by that, clearly hadn't thought very much about it, and then said, yes, of course, that would definitely be part of the conversation along with a whole raft of other things. But it's not been front and centre here at all, and it definitely needs to be. The Peter Thiel question is a really interesting one because he, of course, is this billionaire who made his money initially out of PayPal and who has become a strong supporter of Donald Trump, along with so many of these other tech behemoths, captains of the tech industry. He is definitely influencing policy here. No doubt about that whatsoever. And he's been influencing policy, particularly with regard to the sudden catastrophe and chill in the relationship between the United States and South Africa. He is reputed to be one of the voices that has been persuading President Trump, along with Elon Musk and others here, that the South Africans are engaged in, as Tucker Carlson put it the other day, genocide against white Afrikaner farmers, which of course is not what is taking place in South Africa at all. But again, it's another one of these examples of disinformation being used to determine government policy. And that's a huge challenge for our Prime Minister and every other European leader, and as it has been for Justin Trudeau. How do you deal with a government that is making policy decisions that are not rooted in facts and truth?
Mike, thank you. And a text here from Michael who says, is it left-wingers only this hour? Well, I'm not particularly aware of the political identity or affiliations of anybody that's phoned in. But if you're a right-winger and want to phone in and defend Donald Trump or ask Simon a question about him, then feel free. A different kind of question here from Wesley, who says, hi, Simon. I'm in the process of applying for an ESTA to visit the US. Will my online presence where I criticise Trump count against my application, as there is a text box on the online application of social media handles? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts on that are that at present, I suspect that there will be no connection between a decision to grant you an ESTA and what you have said on those social media accounts. But there is clearly the risk that once you provide the United States government with those social media handles, there is every possibility that at a future date, social media will be scrubbed and will become a determining factor in whether an ESTA is going to be granted. That is not, as far as we know, currently the case, but I think it would be naive to think that at some point it might not become the case.
Can Simon stay till 10? So in fact, there's a worrying number of texts here, Simon, that say that you should do the whole 3 hours. Maybe I should have, if I had 2 gallbladders, maybe I should have the other one out, and then you can come back for another month.
No. I'll be lucky if my voice makes it till 9.
Right. Okay, Richard's in Woolwich. Richard, go ahead, please. Hi.
Thanks, Ian. And Simon, can I just say, I've been traumatised since Trump got in, and there's so much disinformation flying around, and you're just the brilliant correspondent for me to kind of work it all out. And my question is...
Well, that's very kind, Richard. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much.
Thanks. My question is, like, Nick Abbott, in his own tongue-in-cheek way, makes kind of jokes about Trump will never be re-elected. Trump's here for life now. He's going to do the kind of Putin and Xi Jinping and just basically put himself in the office forever. And I'm just I want to test that with you. How undemocratic can Trump really be, do you think?
Well, and I think Nick is actually serious about his viewpoint on that. And as you know, Nick and I talk every Sunday night, Monday morning, towards the end of his programme, and we do a weekly review and look forward to what is coming up here in the United States. Look, the answer to the question of how resilient American democracy is going to prove to be is currently unknown and is going to be tested in the weeks ahead, quite literally, because, we're seeing court decision after court decision stacking up, many of them overturning the things that Donald Trump has ordered when he signs these executive orders, including, the suspension of some of the international assistance programs that were being overseen by USAID, this notion that you can simply go out and fire hundreds of thousands of federal government workers whose positions are congressionally funded. You can bypass Congress by sitting there in the Oval Office every day, simply running the country by executive diktat. I mean, the courts, many of them, are attempting to slow this and freeze it. There are other courts that are assisting Trump and ruling in his favour. And we remain in a position here where it is unclear the extent to which this administration is going to be willing to adhere to court orders and respect them, and reverse ferret when the courts say that they need to do that. Trump himself has on numerous occasions intimated that he wants a third term in office. Steve Bannon at CPAC just a few days ago was leading the crowd in chants of Trump 2028. And he's serious about it. So I think that you cannot rule out the possibility, as I was saying, that even the midterm elections in November of next year, November of 2026, you cannot rule out the possibility that even if elections are held, they won't necessarily look like the kind of free and fair election that we are used to seeing here in the United States. I'm not saying that's guaranteed to happen. I'm simply saying it becomes a more viable possibility with each passing day.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Now, Niall sends an interesting message. He's an airline captain of 30 years, Simon, and his message is 5 words long. I freaking love you both. Well, if you're flying the Ryanair flight to Frankfurt tomorrow morning from Stansted, Niall, I'll see you there. It's 8:47.
This is LBC.
On Monday, for the first time ever, all of LBC's presenters come together to devote an entire day to a vital issue facing us all: the dangers of social media for children and young people.
My son's killer is still online on his social media doing rap videos about what he's done.
1 week before new laws kick in designed to tackle abuses by big tech companies, we'll be asking the tough questions of government, the regulator Ofcom, and of course, the mighty tech companies.
The heads of these companies have blood on their hands because they just don't care.
It promises to be a day like no other. Every issue, every angle. Don't miss this special day of coverage, Online Safety Day, all day, Monday, only on LBC.
Online Safety Day. Listen on your radio and on Global Player.
Lidl's massive
LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 to 9 on LBC. Let's go to Iain in Mould. Hello, Iain.
Hello, Iain. Hello, Simon. How are you both?
We are very well.
Good, Iain.
I've got a friend who lives in Mould. Iain, what's your question?
Yeah, hi. I'd like to ask, and this has been bugging me for a while because I don't think it's been covered before, but if America are so not worried about Russia, why are they so insistent on buying Greenland?
Yes, well, that's a very interesting point, isn't it, Iain? Because Donald Trump keeps insisting that the United States needs Greenland for national security. And you could certainly ask the question, as you have done, national security, because why? Because obviously there is concern about the possibility of some kind of superpower standoff with the Russians. I think for Donald Trump, though, that Greenland is more about national security in terms of the minerals that the United States hopes to glean from Greenland. It's similar to the rare earth mineral deposits that he covets in Ukraine, that these minerals like lithium are now so central to the new economies that are driven, of course, by tech and the developments of AI and his desire to make the United States not only the home of AI, but also the home of crypto, which requires vast amounts of tech infrastructure as well, that he's viewing national security through, you know, a multifaceted prism. And you know, we talk about the possibility of Donald Trump warming up relations with Russia and maybe even entering some kind of an alliance with Russia. But in broader terms, what Donald Trump, I think, wants to be viewed as is as strong and successful a leader as President Xi Jinping in China and President Vladimir Putin in Russia. And both of them covet territorial expansionism. You know, Xi Jinping wants to bring Taiwan back into the mainland. Vladimir Putin obviously wants Ukraine. He's obviously got aspirations to the Baltic states. He's all about expanding Russia. And Donald Trump wants to be all about expanding America, taking back the Panama Canal. And by the way, he had something of a win in that regard just yesterday with a US company buying control of those two ports in the Panama Canal that had previously been controlled by Hong Kong entities, planting the Stars and Stripes in Gaza, seizing Greenland. It's all part of this imperial presidency that he envisages for himself. So it's not necessarily at odds with the idea of a warming relationship with Russia. Depends on what you think he actually really wants Greenland for.
Thank you very much indeed, Iain. Now, in amongst Donald Trump's latest ramblings in the Oval Office, he's just responded to reports that his government might seek to deport the 240,000 Ukrainian refugees who are currently in the US as soon as next month.
Well, we're not looking to hurt anybody. We're certainly not looking to hurt them. And I'm looking at that, and there were some people that think that's appropriate and some people don't, and I'll be making a decision pretty soon. Okay?
President Trump says,
but we're not looking to hurt them, especially Ukrainians. They've gone through a lot.
Well, that was clear, wasn't it, Simon?
Well, that sounds like a definite maybe to me. I mean, this has become a big issue over the last few hours since the news agency Reuters first reported that preparations were underway by the president, possibly as early as April, to order 250,000 Ukrainians who have been offered temporary refugee status here in the United States out of the country. It would begin the immediate deportation of those Ukrainians who have been granted parole status as a result of being welcomed to the country by the Biden administration. It sounds there like he's not ruling it in, but he's also not entirely ruling it out, which will mean that there are many Ukrainians here in the United States that I think will remain on edge over their future. And, you know, he could change his mind the next time he has a crossword with Volodymyr Zelensky. It's clearly a perilous position in which they find themselves.
Right, let's go to Rose in Tavistock. Oh. Hello, Rose.
Hello, Iain. Hi. Hello, Simon. Now, my question's relevant to this. My view from Trump's first week, and bear in mind I'm a stranger to the internet pretty much, it may be delusion, has been that absolute rule was established with similar rapid immediacy to the takeover in Germany in 1933. It's now absolute power shot through with sadism. And I feel that Trump and cohort's simple aim, well, maybe not simple aim, is to extend this rule. They're using derisive comments to destabilise Britain, amongst other things, and ultimately annexing us with a Trump-Putin proxy in Downing Street. Questions, am I overreacting? If not, how on earth do we stand up to this man? Or should we?
Well, Rose, I think you might be jumping a little bit ahead of where we are. I'm not saying that we won't eventually get there.
I'm feeling a bit Meg Ryan at the moment. I'll have some of what you're having, Rose.
You think I'm on something? I think it's true.
Well, I hope you're wrong.
So do I. But,
yes. I'm not sure we'll go quite that far, but I think the mere fact that you are even asking that question is demonstrative of just how far we've already gone, because who would have imagined that by March the 6th we would be in the position that we're in, even on January the 20th, Inauguration Day. I think it's not entirely fair to equate the situation that we're in now with what was taking place, in 1933. I mean, my history on that is not as strong as it should be, but I don't know if the takeover of the power ministries was not more complete then than what we're witnessing here. I mean, I think we just don't know yet how far this is all going to go because of the checks and balances inherent in the American Constitution, and whether this administration, when it knocks up against them, is going to respect those checks and balances in the form of legal rulings. Because Congress is already completely supine. We know he's kind of got that in his back pocket, and I don't see very much changing there unless the economy tanks and Republican constituents start piling pressure on Republican members of Congress and the Senate. So it's really going to boil down to the courts and whether this government is going to adhere to their rulings or not. If it does, then in some fragile way, constitutional democracy might survive. If it doesn't, well, that leads European leaders to make the decisions they're making about the urgent need to rearm.
Rose, thank you very much indeed. Listen, if your voice was better, Simon, and you were feeling better, I'd say let's do another hour, because we could easily do. We've got plenty of calls. We've got loads of texts. It's been really interesting over the last hour, and thank you very much for joining us. I think you need to take to your vapours, don't you?
I'll go and take to my vapours, but we'll do it again soon.
We will. Thank you very much indeed. We are going to turn our attention to the subject of smacking over the next hour, believe it or not, because this is one of those subjects, it's what I call one of those hoary old subjects that comes back time and time and time again. Well, it's come back again today, so we're going to talk about it over the next hour, because child health experts say, yes, there should be a ban on smacking in England. Well, there is in other parts of the United Kingdom. How's it worked out elsewhere? Have there been any prosecutions? If not, what's the point in introducing a new law? Do you agree with these child experts that it is time, once and for all, to introduce a ban on smacking throughout the United Kingdom? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, a man who murdered his ex-girlfriend, her mother and sister in Hertfordshire has been found guilty of rape. Kyle Clifford assaulted Louise Hunt and then killed her, Hannah and Carol Hunt,